I'm Tamara author of The Trauma Beat and host of The Trauma Beat. On this week's episode, a longtime crime reporter speaks with me about her career, her love of the job, and what it means to practice ethical journalism. Here it is. Okay, so Steph, why don't you just start out by introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Steph Crosier. I'm a multimedia journalist at the Kingston Whig Standard. My content is mainly in the Kingston Whig, but is also used across the Postmedia chain as well. I'm a newlywed. I'm a mother of a dog, a sister of 2, and an aunt of 6.
Amazing. Okay, I love that you pointed that out because that is part of the reason why I love to talk to journalists on this podcast. It is humanizing the role, right? Because in the first season of this podcast, I spoke with a lot of survivors and it was like, okay, this is clearly what the problem is. There's harm being caused. We need to fix it. But now I'm so happy to be talking to you to be able to show people here is a human being who does this job and it's not a robot that is behind it. And so it presents some of the nuance that goes along with that. Okay. So Steph, for our listeners who are outside of Ontario or Canada, there's people all over the world that listen to this. Tell me about your paper and about the city that you spent much of your career in.
Yeah, so been in Kingston since December 2014. Kingston has a population of about 100, I think it's 127,000, though I'm probably gonna be off. Our catchment area, our readership area is almost 500,000. Because we just kind of are super spread out. And we are located between Toronto and Ottawa, or Toronto and Montreal, along the Highway 401, one of North America's busiest highways.
Yeah, lots of tractor trailers that move through there and a lot of all sorts of traffic. Okay, so Steph, you were telling me in our previous conversation about your road to journalism. Tell our listeners what your road to journalism looked like.
Yeah, so I have notes and everything.
That's good.
So yeah, mine is an interesting route. I come from a military family, and both my older siblings and my dad are graduates of the Royal Military College of Canada, which is also located in Kingston. So I followed them there right out of high school to study politics, and maybe it's just a stereotype, but I'm horrible at math, like many journalists are.
Well, you know what? I wasn't actually always horrible at math. It's like when I became a journalist, then I became horrible at math. Yeah. It's just I think it kind of goes with the job. No, you're allowed into this profession. I know you know math well, but that's all going to change. So whether you began that where it changed, I get you, Steph.
Yeah. So because of that, I was I failed second year calculus, which I made it through first year.
I was just going to say first year calculus is supposed to be the hardest one, isn't it?
Yeah. So failed second year. And so my lovely parents who know me well knew that I had to keep going. And they immediately enrolled me in Loyalist College's journalism, online print and broadcast program. And it was the right thing for me. It was quite an interesting time in my life, especially emotionally. But they always knew I loved writing. And so I just kind of followed that path, and it led me to journalism. Ended up doing internships at the Hamilton Spectator and the Winnipeg Free Press, and just kind of moved on from there.
An amazing path of journalism. The Winnipeg Free Press, I don't know that I know anybody that did an internship there, but I've heard specifically about the Hamilton Spectator that it is an amazing place for young journalists and that their internship program is just fantastic.
Oh my gosh, it was incredible.
So you told me previously that you'd always gravitated towards the crime beat, to that sort of reporting. And while I too wanted to report full-time on crime from very early on in my career, I understand that for a lot of people listening to this who are not in the journalism realm, this might sound very grim to some people. So tell us a little bit about what drew you to that beat.
Absolutely. It was definitely adrenaline. I don't know if I'd call myself an adrenaline junkie or anything. I've been skydiving, but I have no desire to go bungee jumping. That sort of thing.
What? You'll jump out of a plane without a rope attached to you?
I know.
Okay.
Super logical that way. But yeah, the adrenaline and the teamwork that is required to cover such events. I grew up playing competitive hockey my entire life, and the importance of teamwork. And my family, that's always been important to us. Like we were a family, but we were a team first, and or maybe it should be the other way around. But we were a team in whatever we did. So absolutely that, and I have it sounds odd, but I think I just have the strength for it. I'm willing to take on that stress and thrive through it. And when I can't, I'm super thankful that I have a support system that I can talk to about it. Yeah, that's what drew me to it. I think a lot of people thought I would go into sports because I'm such a jock, but I don't know. It just never grabbed my soul like covering cops and crime does.
So you referred to the strength, that you felt like you had the strength to do it and to take on the stress involved in that job, in the crime and cop beat. What was your initial perception of what would be involved in this job? I guess I'll ask you that first.
My initial perception was just everything we learned in journalism school and things that we saw in the movies. I mean, we saw in the movies the running from scene to scene and asking questions quickly and getting things moving, and there is elements of that, absolutely, but it's not like that at all. Like there's a lot of relationships that are built, relationships built on fairness and trust, and built over time. Like you definitely don't come into this role and are instantly trusted. And if graduates think that that's going to happen, they're going to be disappointed. And then that strength and the stress, it comes back to adrenaline. I maybe my therapist doesn't agree, but I love living on adrenaline. and on the stress, like it's so satisfying at the end of the day. Like it's when I'm exhausted at the end of the day, I know I've done something good. Like I've given everything to this story, whether it's a breaking news item or, unfortunately, with cops and crimes, it's speaking with families. If I've given everything and I'm exhausted at the end of the day, I know I did well. And then I know I can rebound. I recover well. I can rebound the next day.
Well, and that's the thing, like you have to rebound by the next day. That's what it is to be a daily news journalist, right? So if you've given it everything, what does that look like for you? If you're exhausted at the end of the day and you've given it everything, like what does a job well done look like for you at the end of, say, a big breaking news crime story?
It means I've asked all the questions I can and gotten all the answers I can. And even when I can't get those answers, whether it's like hold back information with police or anything like that, I know I've asked those questions, and that our readers are served, and by readers is our community. Our community is served. That's why we do this job. It's so like, no, I'm not going to say especially, but print journalism, like people don't know what I look like. I love that anonymity of it. But I do it for the readers. I do it for the community. People in journalism know that this isn't a job to make money. Like it's a passion. So I'm passionate about serving the community that I live in.
Yeah. Describe the level of training that you received in journalism school about reporting on trauma. Was there any? Like Loyalist, I think if I remember correctly, it's unfortunately one of the journalism schools that has at least put a pause, if not shut down their journalism program. But I know especially a lot of photojournalists that went through Loyalist that I work with in Toronto, and it's an excellent program. But did you receive any training around trauma?
It's an incredible program. Like I remain on the advisory committee for that program. But unfortunately, I don't specifically remember like in the definitions that we've spoken about trauma-informed journalism, next to no. Like I don't think those words came up, but we were taught I mean, and this, it goes along with it, but we were taught to show compassion and empathy and to tell the whole story. So when you are telling the whole story, you're taking into you're taking that into mind, right? Everyone who you're dealing with. And a good journalist does that. Every detail matters. And I do recall that in training for sure.
What about on the job? Is trauma something, like, you've worked in a number of places, is trauma something that has been discussed over the years, and not only how to effectively cover a traumatic story, but maybe how to take care of yourself while doing so?
No.
Yeah, I know, right? I would probably laugh answering that question too
I
if somebody asked me as a journalist.
I wish I remembered every family that I reported on, but unfortunately it happens so much that I don't. But as we're talking now, I'm remembering when I was in Winnipeg, I reported on the family of, or I reported on the death of a 10-year-old girl, and I was an intern. And I was the only one. I had like just gotten home from the newsroom and got the call, like, can you go to this?
Wow.
Sure. So I met the photographer there. I think I was probably like 21 at the time, which is a baby in journalism years.
That was me
And
at the beginning of my career too.
yeah, and this beautiful family welcomed us in. They were had to their wake essentially, and into their family home, and they escorted us down into the basement where the food and the family were gathering. And we sat down with the father, who just was extremely vulnerable, and there we were, just taking from him. And the photo on the front page of the next day was him crying as he was speaking to me.
Mm.
And yeah, it's learning on the job. Now I know that I would, like, now I'd email them back, or reach out to them again, and see how they're going or doing, and let them know, like, this is the photo that's going to be running.
Mm.
Even like just to give them that heads up, so when it comes to training like that, those are moments that are like core memories,
Mm-hmm.
that stick.
I have so many of those, Steph, and
Mhm.
and it took me a while to really appreciate how young I was. Like you said, like, you were a baby in journalism, and because at the time you don't feel that way. You're like, I'm working for this big newspaper. I have these very respected journalists telling me and go and do these things. I'm working with this photographer who's been doing the job for decades, and you feel like you've arrived and you're just there to ask questions and gather as much information as possible as quickly as possible. But you don't feel like somebody with no training. You're like, I just finished journalism school. I just finished this amazing program. But there's nothing, at least, I mean, it's by the sounds of it, you and me both, there's nothing that prepared us for those very real life situations. It's interesting that you said, that you were there taking from them, because they welcomed you into their home, right? They brought you down to the basement where everybody had gathered. What makes you feel like you were taking from them?
Well, I don't think I knew the proper word, and I think taking is the proper word, really, until like our conversations and reading your book, and little
Duncan
plug there.
McHugh, be a storyteller, not a story taker. I don't know if you're at that
Yeah,
part in the book yet, but yeah, he's somebody who I quote very often on that. And I just thought it was interesting to hear you use that word.
yeah, well, like I was saying, like it never really kind of clicked to me that, like, yeah, that is what we're taking,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm thinking about. I've been fortunate. Well, I haven't had. It's been a while since I've had a loss in my family, and just like my grandmother passed away, actually the week after my wedding,
Oh,
and
geez.
I couldn't even imagine someone coming up to me and asking me questions. It's fun. It's Journalism helped me actually during that time, because as the writer, I was given the job to do all the writing that's involved, the obituary and a speech and everything like that. So it was kind of, I'm smiling about it now, but it was really tough at the time. It helped me. I called her old volunteer group and ended up like semi-interviewing them.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so that was really cool.
Well, it is
But
cool because it's a way that you get to know somebody in a very unique way, right?
yeah,
And in that way, like I've written a lot of obits too for my own family, but also through my role as a journalist. And I know that there's been stuff in obits that family members have come to me like, I didn't even know that thing that person told you. But still, like, okay, so if you're comfortable with it, I want to stick with this Winnipeg story for a minute. Do you remember, because you said you had just arrived home and they basically called you back, was this a case of this family had appeared on the local news and then the newspaper wanted it too? Or like, do you remember how this came about, or did they want the media to come to their house?
I think they just got back to the editor
Like the
late.
news
Like,
or
I
mid,
don't think it was anything too crazy like that, or maybe
right?
they. It was so long ago now. It was probably like 13 years ago now, but it. Yeah, I believe it was a medical issue that happened, and I believe they actually reached out to us,
Mm.
which I definitely want to speak about for a
Mm-hmm.
little later. But they reached out to us to talk. So maybe in that case, take isn't right either. Like he was giving us everything, and
Mm.
he wanted to give us everything for his daughter and his daughter's story and what happened to her. So for that, I mean, you're just a sponge, right? You just
Yeah.
be
You'll
whatever
just
you,
take whatever you can. Yeah.
yeah.
So maybe the reason you feel like you were taking, is it because you would have done things differently had it been the current you versus the past you? Like, are there things that you remember about it, or is it just the feeling that it left you with, that you felt like you
I
would
was drained at the end
were
of the
drained?
night because I had to, well, like absorb the emotion in the whole house,
Yeah.
just like, because you are trained to absorb. It's literally what we're supposed to do. I
Yeah.
remember assignment in school where I sat in one room and wrote down everything I saw, felt, and heard, and smelt, and everything. So, and it was that they had very ethnic food around, and it was so fragrant and beautiful. Like, so that was included. So yeah, I mean, I'm remembering it as I talk more about it. I don't know if take was right because he was giving. But I mean, now going back to like if I were to do that story now, definitely would have taken more pauses maybe with him. Let him, I'm sure I didn't rush him in any way. I feel like in these moments, it's just you got to be a good human,
Yeah.
like we're talking about ethical journalism, and it's just being a good human, right? Like
Yeah.
I've always loved listening to people, and just taking that time to listen and be calm. And I'm sure I took a moment to say, like, here's a tissue, like breathe
Mm-hmm.
it through. Like it's okay if you're crying. I don't care. Like it's okay. I'm not judging you.
You really cared.
Yeah, I definitely did not have a say at the time being a little baby intern. The photo chosen to run on the front page, while artistically beautiful and like it captured a moment of extreme sadness and remorse, and maybe not remorse, but extreme sadness. It was a beautiful photo, but was it worth asking? Like it was a close up, like
Mm-hmm.
very to the face. Maybe it would have been worth asking, like, is this okay? Are you okay with that? And he may have been okay with it, but I don't know, maybe in that moment.
You've always wondered by the sounds of it, or it's obviously an
Yeah,
image that stuck with you.
you kind of, well, when you think back about these things, like, okay, what could I have done better? And like with this conversation about trauma informed journalism, like we're learning, we're growing, like things
Yeah.
are coming to light, just like the courts are learning about how sexual assault survivors deal, well, any trauma
Mm-hmm.
survivor deals with memory and deals with their emotions, and when they're ready to come forward. We're all learning.
Mm-hmm.
All society is learning, and journalists are no different in that respect.
We'll be right back. When we first met, you told me, and you just mentioned this a second ago about ethical journalism. You told me that you're the type of journalist who takes ethics very seriously. Can you just expand on what you mean by that?
And yeah, I think what I was just going back to that is just, again, I think it's just being a good human. Like,
Mm,
and just like take a beat and think about what you're
mhm,
doing. Um, and that, like, I follow the Canadian Association of Journalists guidelines
mhm,
that's what we were taught in school. They make all the sense in the world to me. That's what we should be following. We're trying to look at all sides of the story. And I think that's obviously that's the ethical thing to do. Like, it should be
mhm,
an automatic. Um, Ethical journalism, I'm sorry, I'm looking at notes, but like, it's considering your actions and how your story will impact everyone involved in it. Um, and being an ethical stories are accountable to your community, accountable to your readers. You're doing your job right, the proper way. Um, yeah, and
like,
taking note of the like, and it's just, yeah, it's and looking at my notes, just like doing no further harm, considering
yeah,
the little things. Like, as a print journalist, I'm not going to write in quotes or
yeah, no kidding.
like that. And if I'm on television, like if I was a television reporter, I would want them to, or if I was going to be on television, I would want them to be like, okay, elevate your camera. Like, if you're doing a remote thing, elevate your camera, face in natural light. You obviously don't know how people feel about like their appearance, but like, how hard is it to send a little, did you know that the camera can kind of, you might want to wear heavier makeup if you're worried about
Mm,
being washed out, like
mm,
things like that. Like,
mhm, mhm,
it's so little.
mhm.
But for people watching it back, they're like, oh my God, like there's a zit on my forehead. Like,
Oh,
why
and
didn't
why
someone
didn't anybody say anything?
yeah,
Yes.
oh my
Or I
gosh.
clearly had something in my teeth, or I was
Yeah, like,
spitting, or whatever it is.
it's
Yeah.
little things.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I have a note here saying like I'm a rule follower.
Yeah.
And like the worst I do is jaywalk. Uh, and ethics are all about rules,
Mhm,
and just rules exist for a reason.
mhm. So that's where it's interesting because like on one hand, like being an ethical journalist for you is being a good human, right? But then to
Mhm.
be a rule follower, like I was just having this conversation actually a few hours ago with a journalist in the United States about the fact that, we were talking about moral injury that both of us suffered on the job in different circumstances. But when you're a good person who really cares about the people you're reporting on, so you're being the good human, but you have to walk within the confines of this
Mhm.
industry, that can be very difficult. So if you're a rule follower and you're told, because I'm a rule follower too, um, absolute people pleaser too. If I'm told, go and you gather as much information as possible, as quickly as possible to tell as comprehensive of a story as possible, that can sometimes collide with
Yeah.
if you're sitting in the basement with this father who's crying and you feel like maybe, and I'm not saying this was the case in Winnipeg, but just hypothetically speaking, maybe he's hit his limit. Maybe this is harder than he thought it would be. Maybe he's changed his mind. Then do you say to them, like, it's okay, we can stop, you don't need to do this? Because that goes up against, I wouldn't have said that as a young journalist. I wouldn't have said,
No.
we don't need to continue this, because then that means I don't have my story. It means I'm going back empty handed, right? So did you feel that collision of your values during your
Oh,
career?
oh, absolutely. Um, but again, at that time, we didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
As I was so young in my career and had no say. I
Yeah.
was okay. I got to get this story, like, or I won't, because at the time you're kind of hoping like, oh, hire me after this,
Exactly. Well, and for anybody listening who's not a journalist, they might not realize that, like, journalism, you get your starts on internships and you're
Yeah.
hopping from contract to contract to contract. Like I worked at two different newspapers before I got an internship at the Toronto Star, and then I was on four different contracts with them before I went and was hired at another newspaper. Like, it's very precarious work.
Yeah. So you want to do your job to the best of the ability and to make your editors happy. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a balance. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's doable. Now that I'm a little further in my career, it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely doable. Um, yeah.
So
I think,
I want to talk about one of the other things though that can make it difficult. So you reached out to me after seeing a thread that I had posted on social media about the very unfortunate experience of notifying someone that their loved one had been murdered. And I mentioned in this post that the really unfortunate part wasn't for me. It was for the survivor who was notified of this most awful news, not by a trained professional who could connect them with services, but by me, someone who had received no trauma training, let alone any training in death notification. So you wrote in response to that that being first to report the name of a victim is only worth it if the family knows before the media. There was a case in particular in Kingston, where a website reported the name of the victim before family could be told. Working with that family afterwards was traumatic for everyone. So here, where I'm talking about like outside forces making it difficult, I'm thinking about the fact that there was another website that reported it. So being mindful of any identifying details, could you walk me through what happened in this situation?
yes. So this is still a story that, yeah, one of those core memories that stick with me. Hence the traumatic for everyone involved. So in this case, there was a lot of mental health and addictions involved. And someone was murdered on the street. And that family was the immediate family was notified by police because they were local. Um, and then less than 12 hours after that person's murder, a very popular news blog posted the name. And I understand they didn't get the name from the police or a source at the police. It was that they recognized them. Um,
Like they
and
recognized the person who had been killed.
he'd been killed.
Like somebody was actually there for it and they recognized, okay.
Yeah.
Oh. So they
And
didn't have anybody telling them, yes, it's okay to go ahead and report the same. They're just like, I know who that is and I'm going to put it out there.
yeah, this story, it's still online. There's no credit for, there's no source of that information, where they got that information, not even like sources tell us, that sort of thing, which is a little bit of a cop out, but didn't attribute any of that information where they got it. So I learned later that the family wanted to everything kept quiet. Their son had his own struggles in life, and they wanted to have their own private service and have time to let family from out of province know that this had happened and for them to come in for all the services. But because it was out, they and their son did know quite a few people in the community. They felt forced to do a public service. And so they did. So we, of course, attended. This other blog attended as well, and then scurried out right after, unsurprisingly. But
And when you say attended, like you were in the service, like did they welcome the media inside or how did it
yeah,
go down?
yeah, they knew who we were. I wore my press pass. I don't know about that other person, but I wore mine. And I sat right in front of the police investigators, about the very back of the area of where we were gathered. And I was livid. I was livid that this happened to this family, because my sources told me about what had happened and how the family were dealing with it, and that they weren't happy about it. And yeah, I think livid is the most accurate way to describe it, because they put my passion in jeopardy. They as in they made it look bad, basically. And that is not how ethical journalism works. So when I was there absorbing the grief and the stories about this wonderful person, I knew I had to do the ethical thing and give them the opportunity to speak to me, because they didn't get their opportunity when that person's name was out. They weren't given the opportunity to say no to that blog. So yeah, ended up waiting a few hours, and there was a receiving line, and I introduced myself in the receiving line and didn't ask anything at that time. I just gave my condolences and moved on, because that wasn't the point. Again, just be a good person. That's not the point. You want to talk to me?
That's what I assumed you were going to say. Like, I think about myself as a young reporter, and I'm like thinking about, oh my gosh, this must have been awful for you, Steph, like going through there to ask for an interview. I assumed that's exactly what you were doing.
No, so this is a little further. This was just maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm oh my gosh, no, it wasn't. It was like 8 years ago. But I was a little more matured at that point, or I'd grown a lot in my career at that point. And no, I was a good human and said, I'm sorry for your loss, and moved on. And then I noted what family was around them and was able to grab that person and say, my name is Steph. I'm a journalist from the local newspaper, the Kingston Whig. I understand that they're going through a tough time, and that they aren't happy with journalism right now. But if they want an opportunity to speak with me on their terms, I will hang around. So they went and they came back, and they're like, just wait till the line is gone, because it was a huge receiving line. So I think that took another hour. Texting my boss, like, you're not getting a story tonight. And it was worth it. From a journalist standpoint, it was worth it because I got the story. But human standpoint, it was worth it because they were able to talk to me, and they felt good about it, so good about it that they then invited me into their home for a more in-depth interview and a more in-depth article. And then a year later, I was able to talk to them on the anniversary. And then a few months after that, one of the officers involved was given an award for his actions. And I was able to talk to them about that and it was just a little thing, like they were able to see them, and it was that following up, but it was restoring their trust in journalism. And it was traumatic for them to be outed like that. And it was traumatic for me because I didn't want that pressure. Like, I feel that pressure enough when I do I'm trying to do an obit. I feel that pressure enough on any other story, but maybe I put it on myself, but to feel the need for redemption is I think the word is, I needed redemption for our passion, for our career, and our role in the community, which is so important and people don't always appreciate.
You didn't want to be at that funeral under those circumstances of this family having felt like they were forced into that position. You would have rather been there because from the beginning they wanted you there, or not been there because they had made the choice to not have the media there.
Yeah, exactly. Which is their right. Like, I think it's fair to say that 80 to 85% of families do want to tell the media their story, their family member's story, but some of them don't, and that is okay. Like,
that's really interesting though to hear you say that high, because I don't know what I would have put it at as a journalist. Now I'm like, I work with survivors, and to be fair, many of the survivors that I work with, I'm working with them because they don't want to deal with the media. They want an intermediary. But I think a lot of people out there would be surprised to hear that from your perspective, most families do want to talk to the media. Can we talk more about that and what leads you to believe that?
And I guess I mean, that's kind of those numbers are kind of what I've always known from like journalism school, but it's also been reflected in my own career. It's also how you approach a family too, which I've also learned over the years, like how to be more compassionate when you're reaching out to people. I've definitely been told to take a hike in very
straightforward terms. Yes.
That is right.
Yep.
And you take the hike. But more often than not, in my experience, and maybe it's our city is small and it sometimes feels too small. People do know each other. maybe that is a reason why people are more willing to speak with, I mean, me in my experience. I think it helps with the fact that I'm in print. People may be more comfortable than like, because I don't have a giant camera in front of them for the
It's
most
definitely
part.
a lot less intimidating having that tiny voice
Absolutely.
recorder or just your notepad than a big
Don't
camera and a
know.
big microphone.
I don't know how television journalists get obits, to be honest. Like, because I would never, if I was dealing with the death, stand in front of a camera. Like, so, yeah, that's been my experience, that they do want to tell the story.
So can you tell me more about, because you just said a moment ago, like you've learned more over the years and how to be more, did you use the word compassionate or gentle in your approaches? Can you talk a little bit about those approaches? Like, how do you approach a family? How do you extend that opportunity for them to speak if they want to, like not knowing? Because I'm assuming it's the same for you as it was for me in my career, where there typically hasn't been a number that you can call and say, hey, is this family talking? Like there isn't, system is not set up in a way, right? There isn't that. So if you're wanting to practice, trauma-informed journalism, if you're wanting to like kind of keep that degree of separation so the family can make a choice without you being in front of their door, you need to like really figure out how to do that, because that system's not set up that way. So what has been your practice, and maybe how has that changed over the years?
Yeah, so early on, it was just a message saying, hi, I'm Steph from the Wig. I'm sorry for your loss. Do you want to talk to them about them? Very blunt, very short. I think at the time when I was younger, I thought less is better. Like they don't want to talk to me. Like don't interfere, don't hurt them further, that sort of thing. Just being a good human type of thing. But I think based on like my experience, that could be a turnoff, or maybe it's too much of an out. And now I don't want to speak for families. That sounds like I'm speaking for families, but I think if you're in a state where everything is hard, everything is complicated, nothing makes sense, your loved ones passed away and that doesn't make sense to you. If they're just saying, hey, do you want to talk to me? Okay, I don't want to talk to you. Like immediately out. Now I've learned to say the word, it is an opportunity if you want to. Not to shove it on them like it's an opportunity, take it. So what I draft now, what I message or what I say when I call is, hi, my name is Steph from the Wig. First off, I'm sorry if hearing from me causes you discomfort. That is not my intention here. And I'm sorry that you're in this situation. What I do is try to tell stories of those who have been lost in these circumstances. If you want the opportunity, this is how you reach out to me. If you don't, no harm, no foul. I'm completely okay with that. And again, I'm sorry if this message caused you discomfort. And then that's it. And more often than not, if they don't want to, they'll reply and say, thank you for your message, but no, thank you. But again, most of the time they're like, yeah, sure, for a few minutes, or even just to provide a photo. Then instead of like, if it's a collision, instead of the car wreck, and I know that kind of leads in maybe to another conversation about those initial images. Yeah, it gives them the out. It gives them a clear picture of what they could do if they want. Now, as I'm evolving and reading your book and speaking with you, I give them an example of what I'm going to look to do. Yeah. I just did that.
Okay. So can you tell me how that went? Like what sort of example, what would you be saying to them in that circumstance?
Which one? Sorry.
Like when you say you give them an example, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I've written a number of obits over the years.
So so it's actually showing them, this is
here's
some of
a
the
link
work that I've done. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I love that. I
so
love
they
that.
kind of know, like, oh, that's kind of the vibe. Like,
yes,
they're given an opportunity to talk about who they are, but I see that, oh yeah, she has to bring up why we're here in the first place.
Yeah.
Gives them that heads up that
Yeah.
about what to expect.
Yeah. Okay. So, I love that, Steph. Okay. So I wonder, like you were just talking about when you're putting together a message to send to the family, do you ever find yourself, or have you found yourself in your career, like just doing those cold door knocks? Like I did a million of them as a journalist and it sucks.
Yeah. I think I'd be lying if I didn't say that I delay that as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you always try a more indirect.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
absolutely. I've even gone through funeral homes, actually.
Yeah.
And actually they have been wonderful.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's a trick or treat or anything, but
Mhm.
my husband is a funeral director. They
Oh,
know
wow.
how to speak with those experiencing loss. And before I did that for the first time, I didn't know my husband at the time, but I was just thinking, like, they know how to ask them. They know how, like, if I was in that situation, the funeral director who I'm being vulnerable with,
Mm-hmm.
probably the person I would want to ask me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And so cold knocks. Yeah. I delay that as much as possible. I try and go through different means. I prefer things in writing
Mm-hmm.
personally. I am anxious about speaking. I'm obviously getting better, or I wouldn't have agreed to this. I
Well, no, but do you think part of that is that you're trying to create that barrier? Like you're trying to give them an opportunity to think about it and say no, whereas you feel like if when you're at that door, they might not feel comfortable saying no, or they might not really be able to process it
I
with
think
you
that's
there.
on me to like reiterate. You can say no.
Yeah.
So my most recent, unfortunately, most recent family I've had to work with, it was a call. It was a phone call. They were one of the few people who are still listed.
Ugh.
And so I cold called them, and yeah, the family answered, and I pretty well said what I would say in the message. I'm sorry if this bothers you.
Mhm.
You don't have to talk to me, but if you want the opportunity. And in that case, they said, could you call back in 5 minutes? We're going to talk about it. I was like, sure. I actually gave them 10 minutes. Because I'm like, I just want them to be sure. It
Mhm.
was 2 or 3 days after their loved one passed away. So, yeah, I called them back, and in that case, they did want to talk, and
Mm.
were beautiful and vulnerable, and their loved one was amazing and wonderful to work with, and yeah,
I
and yeah.
I think that like any journalist listening to this can feel so deeply like that moment of picking up the phone and
Oh,
calling. I know I can. And I've shared a story. I don't know if I've shared it on this podcast or in my book or just talking to some other people, but I often think back on this time when I was a young journalist and sitting out like in this pod with another young journalist, another intern, and she had a list printed out from Canada411.com and of all the same last name. And clearly she'd just been tasked with looking for the family of whatever tragedy just happened. And I'll never forget like looking at her and she's just looking down at this list and she has tears coming down her cheeks and she just can't and I said to her, like, do you want me to do it for you? And she said no. And she just did it. But it was so hard. But it's like by that time I had like sort of built up that armor. I can do this. It's part of the job. You have to. We'll be right back. For anybody who's listening to this who's not a journalist, has never had to call down that list, like, can you describe what that it has been like for you and what that's like for you in those moments? Like, you find the numbers, you put them together, maybe you've got a notepad and you're like writing them down and crossing them off. Like, how does that make you feel?
my therapist says I'm not good with emotions.
Mm.
Or like putting those into words. But physically, um, yeah, physically, I am running from having to do that. But I know it is my job to give them that opportunity. physically, your chest is tight, your stomach is non-existent at that point. And I mean, I sweat, I shake, but you knock on the door, you call them because it's bigger picture. You know, you have to look beyond yourself in that moment. And then you rebound the next day.
Why do
Or
you think you're
not even the next day, like the next hour, the next 5 minutes.
Right.
You have to rebound because you have to be strong for that family. There's nothing wrong with showing emotion when you're interviewing someone. And I've learned that over time as well. I thought I always had to be cold and straight and strong for them. But I've learned you do have to be strong for them, but it's okay if you show your feelings in front of them. And then you have to rebound for when you write that story, because you can't write it through cloudy, teary eyes. You know, you have to rebound and be
There's
strong.
way too much to do in the span of a news day to linger on that, right? Why do you think your body reacts in that way? Like when you don't know if somebody is going to slam the door in your face or let you in or answer the phone or not, or what, like, because I was the same. I hated doing that stuff. And a lot of journalists will tell you it's the worst part of their job. Why do you think we react in that way?
Because we're human beings.
Yeah, but like, because like I feel like it's like
I don't want to be intrusive. Like this
yes.
person, people are hurting. Yeah. And like you, I mean, for myself, when I'm shut down, I don't talk to anyone. That's something I have to work on. So, and when you're grieving, like there are some people who need to talk it out, and I've learned that talking it out is good, and they heal that way, and they share their beautiful family member's life with the world, and it helps them. But there are some like barely want to organize a funeral, right? And or a service or a celebration of life. Like they barely want to make those phone calls, let alone and talk to us. Like,
yeah, no kidding. We're very low down on the priority list. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple of times in this podcast that like you were reading my book, and you told me that when we last spoke, and my initial reaction was like, as it is with any journalist who tells me that they're reading my book, is like this deep sense of responsibility. Like I want to protect you from the potential harm that can come from reading this book. I don't want it to result in any feelings of shame or anything. These are all the ways that you've gotten things wrong. Like, how could you do that? Like, that was not my intention, but I do feel this protective nature to not harm journalists who are reading this. But can you tell me like how you've been finding it in terms of like any revelations or anything that you've been surprised by or that you've learned? Like, I'm not here to promote my book, but like, I want to know how you're doing, because for me, writing it was a huge personal reckoning. The things that I learned while I was writing it, as you can probably tell, like it hit me pretty hard. Like, oh my God, all these things I did, all these things survivors are telling me not to do. That's what I did. Like my whole career, how much harm did I cause? So how have you been taking care?
Yeah. Well, I'll promote it for you. I have already. Yeah, so haven't felt shame, but felt awkward maybe. I think that's kind of the best way I would describe it. Like, oh yeah, I've done that. But I personally have kind of what I like to say, I have a growth mindset. Like I have compassion for myself, that we're learning. Like I'm learning. I didn't know these things. You know, how was I to know if I wasn't taught it, or if you know, yeah, if I ever wasn't taught it. So I have been enjoying it. I'll be honest, I got it in June, and I'm only halfway through because I have to take breaks.
For sure.
Because it's sometimes it's too much at the end of the day. Like if I'm writing about this all day, I'm not going to read about it before I go to bed.
For sure.
Right.
It's not good self-care.
Yeah. Going to read a goofy beach read or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I take breaks on that. But I have enjoyed it. yeah, a little plug. I would encourage every journalist, every journalism student to read it.
Is there
But yeah,
anything that surprised you? And thank you for that, by the way, Steph. But
yeah,
has there been anything in there that surprised you that you didn't realize? Like, oh, I didn't realize that that could cause harm, or I didn't think that survivors would react that way, or I always thought that this was the best way of doing things, and maybe I had it wrong.
definitely. Definitely the following up. I've always thought, like as a person, that I would want to follow up. But then the other side of my brain was saying, you've already like caused them enough stress. Like don't get back in there. And
Isn't that interesting? Like let's just explain what we're talking about first. So when we refer to following up, like one of the things that many survivors told me in the course of my research was that they were upset about the lack of follow-up from journalists. So
yeah.
it's like we swoop in there, we take this big emotional thing from them, they're crying into our voice recorder or our microphone, and then we disappear and they never hear from us again. And they're like, whoa, where did that person go? But like you, I always felt like I would be causing further harm, like bring them back to this awful thing, which is interesting, right? Like if it's like if we're acknowledging that we're like a negative presence in their lives, should we be there to begin with? But it's like it's a bit of like a mind bleep.
Well, it's giving the opportunity to speak like they want to, but it doesn't mean it's not hard. Like, so it's like, I think they know, well, no, yeah, I think in my experience in speaking with families, like it's hard every time. It's hard every time they see the story, but they know that they've done good. Like this is, I can take this hit, so my loved one's story is out there.
Yeah.
So their voice isn't forgotten, or their life isn't forgotten. But yeah, the following up, it was like, oh, I don't want to, it's hard for them to do it in the first place. So like, do they really want to hear from me again?
Yeah. But
And
then we end up following up only for times that we want things from them, right?
Right. Yeah. So there is definitely kind of a balance we need to strike. And I mean, in reading your book, I've done a few more follow-ups with some people without any agenda. The most recent one, I brought them our paper because I knew where they live. They were on 401, so I knew where they were. I brought them the paper, and they were so kind, and they invited me in and started making tea, and they were talking like, oh, we actually already collected like 10 papers because we had a bunch of but thank you. I'm like, oh, here's my folded in half one.
Yeah, but that's fine. Like it's the thoughtfulness, right?
Yeah, I know, and maybe I should be more of a grown up about it, but I lasted like 5 minutes. I was like, okay, don't worry about the tea. It's fine. Like, you guys got things to do.
Yeah.
I mean, and driving away, I felt, oh gosh, I felt good, like knowing that, like, okay, that's all they needed, and I felt good that it didn't cause them harm, that they were happy I was there, happy enough to welcome me in, right? And, I was probably more awkward than they were.
Well, it makes sense, like looking at it from the outside, because it's like, okay, you weren't just some like fly by night. You didn't just come in here and gain our trust and take this big thing and then disappear.
So
when you got it.
I think what I forgot to mention is I think people, and I think journalists forget that people don't talk to journalists every day. Like we are,
or ever. Most people have never probably talked to a journalist.
We are an event in their life. I spoke to a journalist, whereas for us, we're like, oh my gosh, I talked to like 50 people today, like called these people, did these stories, did 3 stories today, blah, blah, blah. And they forget that we may be a core memory to them. And it stresses me out sometimes walking around. And if someone comes up to me, like, oh, hi, Steph. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I talk to them for a story and I have no idea who this person is? Like,
yeah. And was it a really bad story? Was it a traumatic story? Was it a not? Yes. Yeah.
So it's just kind of like running through like who I've spoken to. And I think we need to be reminded of that sometimes. Like we are a special case for them.
I actually really love that because it can go both ways. It can be a good thing or a bad thing. Like we're a core memory. You can this is one of like the light bulb moments for me in this conversation. I have one, at least one in every conversation that I have. And it is that like if I'm like talking to a journalism class now, I want to tell them, it's very likely you're going to be a core memory for this survivor, especially if it's not the immediate aftermath. Like immediate, they might not remember anything because it's just a blur. But if you're talking to them like this is a huge event in their life, are you going to be a positive core memory? Or are you going to be a negative core memory? Is that going to be a traumatic memory or is it going to be a healing memory? And you showing up with that copy of the paper the next day or whenever it was, like that's a warm healing memory, I imagine it'll be for them. So. Yeah, I know.
It's with any story too. Like it doesn't necessarily need to be traumatic either. Like it could have been about a fundraiser.
Yeah.
And little Timmy
so
raised the most money,
So
and
true.
We're in the paper.
Yeah, for sure.
Scored your only team's goal and the paper was covering and your name was in the paper. Yes. Like that's exciting for people. Yeah. And I love that. But yeah, it is the flip side. Like there's such a huge span.
Yes.
So I think journalism students absolutely should be told that for sure.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a police officer, a very like senior police officer, and he was telling me about like some of the lessons that he shares with new recruits. And I don't want to misquote, so I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he would tell them like, you are going to be entering people's lives in like their darkest moments. And you want them to look back and say, or you want to be able to look back and say, I'm happy that I was on shift when that person experienced that because I treated them in this way, or I'm happy that it was my team that responded because I know we care, right? Like this awful thing happened. We can't change that from happening, but at least I got to be the one that was there dealing with them, and that gives you the control to do good, right? Yes. To do things in the right way.
Yeah. And I think I've experienced that in my role as well. Like he's absolutely right. Like police especially like can be, I mean, we don't need to go, that's a whole other conversation. Absolutely. But it's the same for journalism as well. Like it's I forget what I was going to get at with that, but
it resonates like that. When he told me that, it really resonated to me as a journalist. And actually I think that that was for a project I was doing with the police service at the time. I think I shared that sort of personally on my social media saying like, he was speaking as a police officer, but journalists pay attention to this because this is it, right? Something else I wanted to talk to you about, Steph, and we've already sort of touched on it, like the idea of having that barrier between the journalist and the survivor. In your experience, what has been the role of police or victim service providers in connecting you with trauma survivors? I sort of alluded to the fact that I assume there's been nothing, but was I right to assume that?
Absolutely. Victim services, they are busy and they do not have enough funding from our provincial government or federal government. So I don't put anything on them. They are doing enough. I've done a couple stories with them and give them all the credit in the world. So I'm going to leave them alone.
Yeah. Well, it's like mostly run by most places. Victim services is by and large run by volunteers. So
yeah. Yeah. So they're in the clear with me. Police, no, they haven't. Like I think I wrote nada. Nada. Maybe it was. I'm thinking. I was trying to remember a case, and I think the one case that kind of comes to mind was a fraud case. They had been defrauded a bunch of money, and the officer actually reached out to them to see if they would talk to me because in fraud cases, it's like lessons can be learned. For
sure.
So they had a willingness to try and share that story so others would learn. But yeah, no. And I think that should absolutely change. Like police need to take, this is a service to community and victims are part of the community. Yeah. Police have they serve the community and victims are part of the community. And they need to take media relations, which is community relations, in my opinion, more seriously than they do. And be a liaison between for victims. And I feel like there's an easy way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's not, like, if they want to set up maybe guidelines, like if you want to talk to this family, you're sending questions before, you're letting them look before, you're letting them to provide a photo instead of the crash scene photo.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a way to do it. It's just police services allocating the funds to take media relations, community relations more seriously.
Mm-hmm.
They like to say they're transparent about things. Prove it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
money where your mouth is, and help. When it comes to victims, this could be something that they do if they want to take this seriously.
Well, that's sort of how I always frame it to police too, because I do think that this is something that should be offered by police, like an opportunity to support you with the media, you as the trauma victim or survivor, to support you in this, like you've been put in this horrible situation. And I frame it as a customer service thing. Like the community is your customers, and the community is made up of your customers. And unfortunately, many of the customers that you guys are serving are often people who are experiencing the worst times of their lives. And this is a service that you can offer them. And it would be so nice if you could, like what difference would that make for you, Steph? If there was a number you could call, if you could call the police station, whatever police service, there's a number of jurisdictions in Ontario, and say, is this family talking? And they say, we're going to go have a conversation with them now, or we're going to be helping them with a statement, or, pass along your questions, and we'll let you know, like, what difference would that make for you as a journalist and as a human being?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they like to say we're partners in this, but it's not. It's a pretty one-way street. In my opinion, like, there's definitely ways that could be better. And yeah, being able to call them, who they've already been in contact with the family, like, so it allows the family to limit the number of people they talk to, because if they don't want to talk to anyone, they can just tell the police who they're already talking to, no, thank you. But it would be great if they went to them and, like, fully described the opportunity that it is, and explained that how it works, give those examples. And I think it's possible to make that happen. I just don't know if there's the drive to do it yet.
But it would, like there's definitely things that police services and different victim service providers, not just, those volunteers that I was speaking about, but different agencies. I think there's definitely a lot of stuff that they can do to support survivors and journalists who tell their stories. But it also does require a lot on the part of journalism, because I'm thinking back to that news blog that you were referring to that went ahead and published that victim's name when the family didn't want it out there. So who's to say that, you call police and they say, no, this family says they're not talking. You say, okay. But then you look on the blog and they've just gone and knocked on the family's door and gotten a picture of them standing in the doorway and literally like a 1-sentence comment. And then your bosses are coming to you and they're saying, I thought this family wasn't talking. Like, what do you do then?
Yeah, be frustrated for a second. And I think that's a valid feeling. It's selfish feeling, but I think it's a valid one to go through, like, the process. But if everyone is following the same rules, the same ethical guidelines that we want to do, I would hope that doesn't happen. And if it does, I can go to my boss and be like, I did it the most professional way I could. Don't know what to tell you. I could go back to the police and say, listen, have they changed their mind if they've spoken to these people? And maybe it's extra work for that officer to then be like, so other people saw that you spoke to them. Would you be willing to talk to someone else, and just take the loss if they don't?
And the thing is, though, I don't know that it necessarily would be a loss. And maybe I'm like, so the context I'm thinking about when I brought this scenario up is, like, there was this story when I was a really young journalist and, 21 years old. And there was this awful crash, a triple fatality. And the one surviving person was a taxi driver and who is severely injured in the crash. And me and actually, I don't remember if this other reporter was there. I went to the taxi driver's home, this apartment, and his wife told me, no, he's in bed. He's not talking. It's just not going to happen. And I went back and I told my office that. And then at 6 o'clock, my editor runs over as I'm filing my story and says, you said this guy wasn't talking. And here he is on this newscast. And I'm like, what? Like, there's no way. The wife said he was in bed. He's heavily medicated. It wouldn't even be possible to do an interview. So I went back and I watched the story because that was back in the day that they would record everything. I went back and I watched it, and it was literally one clip of the guy laying in bed, very clearly heavily medicated. And he just said, I hurt. And that was the big exclusive interview, right? But my boss was mad because as far as they were concerned, that news station got the interview and I didn't, even though it wasn't really an interview. It was just a matter of, so I think that newsroom managers have a big part to play in this too, and trusting their people that if somebody told them no, it's a no. And maybe that person decided to speak with someone else, and fine, maybe they didn't want to talk to me for whatever reason, then they want to talk to that person. But, or maybe they didn't want to talk to that person and that person just caught them at the door and just got that one line out of them and that picture to show that they were there. And because who really cares beyond, like, who cares beyond us? Do news consumers care that? It is exploitive, but it happens all the time, and it's not ethical. That is unethical, right? Yeah. But then it puts you in a position as the ethical reporter thinking, do I need to go back to this family? Do we need to bother them again? And bottom line, we just need everybody to be playing by the same rules, and those need to be good rules.
Yeah, like I had put a note down where like there are a lot of people who think they could be journalists, or not think they can. I think anyone, like, you don't need to go to journalism school to be a journalist, but follow the rules and be a good human.
Yes. We'll be right back. You refer to a news blog, but there's citizen journalists all over the place on social media who don't necessarily abide by publication bans, who don't, they don't think before they post in terms of like graphic imagery, that sort of thing. And it
even anonymity. Anonymity is a big one.
Yes.
Where, and if we're talking about like a traumatic event, if they're just going to take information from anyone on the street, this just came up recently, actually, where I made the decision, like, no, I'm not going to take this information because you didn't get the name of this person, because they didn't trust us with it. They don't understand the rules of anonymity, and those are the rules of anonymity. Their life has to be in danger. Their livelihood has to be in danger. And it has to serve the greater good. It's got to be worth it to society for me to take that information. And if they're saying so people aren't following that rule, they're just taking the information and going with it. Witnesses at the scene said he was found laying against a wall and blood coming from him. What good is that serving?
Yes, exactly. But what harm is it possibly causing? That should be the question we're asking, because there could be a lot of harm that could come from that.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah.
The things that have been published. I'm like, why are you being like this?
Yes, I know. I hear you. I want to talk about like some of the rules that we abide by, if we could all abide by the same rules. So I have like brought up some different ideas for journalists that some people think are kind of radical and some people think are totally doable. The biggest one being, like, I think that journalists should show their stories, like their entire stories, to survivors, who those stories are about, before they're published or broadcast to the world. And the reason I give for this is to take away that element of surprise, and basically of surprise, which can be very harmful to survivors. And I basically say, like, if it is a story about their trauma, if you are doing, like that obituary, for example, I don't want to be making that survivor flinch by not telling them exactly what's going to be in it, or letting them see it, or telling them when it's going to be out, or whatever. So what are your thoughts on that? Would something like that be doable in your journalism world?
Yeah, I go back and forth on this since we've started talking about it. You're very convincing of
Thank you.
as to why it should be done. And I do think it does make sense for these specific cases of something like an obit, when you're dealing directly with a family and their own agenda. Because the worry is the agenda, right? Like whoever you're talking to, I'm not going to let them influence my story with their agenda. It's the same reason why I hate statements. I hate when I don't generally send questions ahead of time and then have them written right back. They can add their agenda too easily. But when you're talking about a family going through this, ask yourself, what is their agenda here? Their agenda is to, in my mind, is to heal, and to make sure their loved one isn't forgotten. We now know that memory it can be unreliable for people going through trauma. It's happened just recently. Luckily, we caught it before it went into print. It was a case where I didn't show them. They did ask, and I did say no.
So a family had given you an interview. They asked to see it ahead of time. You said no, but there was a mistake in there because they had mistakenly told you something, or something was misconstrued.
Yes, it was a minor thing. It was a number of siblings. And it was because he had a lot, and some had passed away. Right. And so the way it read in the stories as if they were all alive. So they just wanted to just clarify that. And it was a quick shift in writing. Like, it wasn't a huge deal or anything like that. But it was just like a little thing that you're not going to remember oh, he had so many siblings, and you're not necessarily going to add, oh, and 5 of them are dead.
Yes. So that make it into the paper, and you had to change it on the online version. Is that what it was?
Well, it went online before it went into print. So as soon as it was published, I had sent it to them. I had sent it to them in case I had messed something up. There was still time to fix it. And luckily there was time, and I was able to fix it for print. So that was wonderful. But yeah, it's still something. Showing beforehand is still that gut reaction.
Because that's one of the things with journalism, right? You don't show your story ahead of time. You don't want it to be influenced by anybody. But did that story then make you rethink that? Whether, if in that same scenario again, if a family asked to see the story ahead of time, would you show it to them even before putting it online?
Honestly, it wasn't before our conversation that I considered it. I did automatically tell them no. And then I just have to sell my experience. I've been doing this for quite a while. I've been doing this for quite a while. I think I'm pretty good at it. These, you've seen from my examples of what I'm going for. This is what to expect. And that it seemed to set them at ease. They replied fine with it. Didn't bring it up again. So, but yeah, it was our previous conversation that made me think well, what is the harm in that?
Yeah. And that's what I'm asking. You think that you would, if you were in that situation again, you would share it?
I think so.
I know. It's hard.
So hard. It's so hard to get out of that.
I'm trying to show people who are listening to this, it is a real struggle for journalists, this thing. And journalists do think that this is quite radical. Many journalists, not all, but that I would suggest that they show their story to anybody before, other than their editors. But what I'm getting at is when it comes to trauma, it's different. And survivors of traumatic events should be treated differently than people who are holding to account and who have spin masters who are going to say, oh, you shouldn't have said that. Let's retract this statement or whatever. It is different. but I get like
I'm drinking your Kool-Aid on it. I am.
Okay, good. Enjoy that Kool-Aid.
And I am like, and I've done this for a few other things, but I am up for giving them like a list of questions or like a list of topics.
Yes.
You know, because I rarely go into interviews myself with a list of questions. I just have topics because it's just a conversation. So I am down for that. But yeah, the handing over and maybe this is like, it could be and I'm trying to think of the right word, but I'm good at what I do. And someone who's not a writer may not know that certain things should be included. I don't want to say I know better than them, but like there might be a chance I might know better in a certain situation, but I don't know their grief better than them. I don't know their family member better than them.
You don't know what could potentially harm them because you don't know if maybe the use of language in one way might be very harmful for them because there's a very personal thing attached to it that you're not aware of.
Well, and with I like a language thing that is very common is when cyclists are involved in a collision with a vehicle. Almost every time we put collision, because that is what police say, because we cannot assign guilt. We always get an email saying the vehicle hit the cyclist. Just write that. It's like, well, I can't because the judge or a jury didn't say that.
I know.
There's ways to write around it. So I mean, I've written came in contact with, like a car came in contact with a cyclist or vice versa. Police are trying to determine how the two came in contact. But yeah, but in those circumstances, like collision is the term. But you don't know how that's gonna.
You never know. I often think back to like in my current role where I work with trauma survivors and supporting them with the media. I do a lot of work with them, like writing statements. So I will talk to a homicide survivor, for example, about their murdered loved one, and we'll just have a conversation. And then I'll write a statement for them and send it back to them. And then, we go back and forth until it's exactly right for them before releasing it to the media. And I always think back to this one family that I worked with years ago who I had this conversation and they used the nickname of their loved one in the conversation. And so like affectionately, and I put that nickname into the statement, said something like, affectionately known as such and such by family. And that was like the one thing that they wanted to change when they got back to me. Like, can we just take out the nickname because that's just too personal for us. That's something we want to hold on to just for ourselves, and they weren't thinking about in the context of talking to me that could be something that could be shared with the public, and then being able to take that, like, yeah, absolutely. We can take that out. We can take out whatever you want, but you just to give them that control, it makes such a difference. Okay. The one other thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of like how we can change things is something that you've actually mentioned a couple times in this conversation. And that is, showing the wreckage of traffic fatalities, for example. And you sort of alluded to how this could cause harm for survivors, or showing body bags. Do you think, because this is something that many survivors in my research said was harmful for them, seeing the body bags, seeing the car wreck, like they say, why do we show this? Why do we need to show this? Is it reasonable to think that media outlets stop showing these images?
This is a conversation I was like nervous for, and I was trying to find a good way to put it into words, because let me find this. Sorry. Right. Okay. So when I start a story, I'm doing my best to tell the entire story, to inform the community of everything they need to know and to see. And photojournalism plays a vital role in storytelling. And I think in the initial story, that is important to show. that this has happened. There is a human there that should not be forgotten. And if we can't connect with the family, we see them. We see you. You know, you're not forgotten. And I think that's an important aspect to storytelling.
Just to cover the story period, basically. Is that what you're saying? And like, and if you're covering a homicide or a traffic fatality, like those are just the images, if you haven't connected with the family, that would have to run with the story.
To tell the entire story, yes. Yeah. To tell it in the most fulsome way. I can only describe the damage to a vehicle so much, where a photo can show the vehicle, that the roof has been ripped off or something. Like I can only describe it so many ways. But along those lines, when we do connect, I don't see how it's necessary to continue to run that photo with an obit that you've worked with the family. You know, we find the family of the person who was unfortunately in that body bag. I don't need to write their story and then include the photo of the body bag. That's just not necessary.
So what happens then if a family doesn't want to talk, but they contact a newsroom and say, can you take down this photo of our loved one in a body bag or of the car wrapped around the tree or whatever it is? Should a newsroom take that down? Like if they're saying it's harmful to me.
Yeah.
You need the photo to tell the story?
I think that's fair. And then we would have a line in the story saying we have this, but we've taken it down for this reason. Yeah, like in my growth in growing, I think that's fair now. Like,
and it's important to, I like that you say that, the growth and growing and the still learning. And this is one of the reasons I was interested to talk to you, and why I mentioned that you said that you were like halfway through my book, because you're very much at the, like, you're learning about it and you're eager to learn about it. And that's what I love, because if you would have asked me as a journalist, do you need to show the body bag? I say, yeah, because as a visual storyteller, as a television journalist, that's the best way to show that somebody was murdered in my mind. You get the body bag shot. That is how you show how fast that car was going, by showing that it was cut in two. It was going so fast that it was cut in two or whatever. And then if you would have asked me, like, well, what if the family doesn't want it? I would have really, really struggled with that. Now I'm like, yeah, take it down if it's harmful. Or what I even like more is this provincial prosecutor. You may or may not be at this part yet in the book. This provincial prosecutor in Ontario who's worked with a lot of traffic fatality families. I asked him, like, so what do we show? Like, all these families are saying they don't want to see these images, but what do I as a television journalist show then if I can't show the car where this person died? And he said, well, what about, like, if there's, for example, if there's two vehicles involved and somebody died in one of those vehicles, but not the other, what about just showing the vehicle where nobody died and say in your report, out of respect for the victims' families or the survivors or whatever, however you want to say it, we are only showing the vehicle where everybody survived. And that signals to your audience that we care about these people who could be harmed by this. And it signals to the family, like, we care about you. Here's your validation. And I loved that.
Yes, I guess my only pushback with that is that you don't know that for every victim. Maybe the victim's family wants people to see. Maybe they were a victim of drunk driving.
Like, but maybe they'll call you then. Maybe we shouldn't be taking the choice. Like, maybe we're erring on the side of caution until they say to us, or until that magical media liaison who is part of the system calls us and said, actually, the family really wants these images out there. And then you can still maybe put a warning at the beginning to other traffic fatality survivors whom trauma responses might be activated by it. Who knows? But I don't know. Like, I feel like so many survivors have told me that it harms them, that it would be better to err on the side of caution. It doesn't mean don't photograph it or, don't record it. You can have those images and not share them with the public, because maybe a family does come back to you. Like, I've had families say to me, why weren't you at the funeral? We wanted
Yeah.
you at the funeral. Like, you need to put this on TV, and pull out their cell phone videos of an open casket with a murdered young man and say, people need to see this. So you don't ever know, but that, yeah, I mean, it's a great point, but that's the problem. We don't know. We don't
How
know.
much, and yeah, so like how much can we take on?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And it's the same with following up. Like I can't follow up all forever, you know, because
Yeah.
I'm a journalist, not a therapist.
Yes.
Because I don't say that in a cold way. I say that in that I may not be able to help you. I
Yeah.
might not be able to give you the help that you are seeking,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, like it's a lot to put on
Mhm.
a journalist and journalism in general. But it would be a great job for media liaison.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. I think that if we all work together, if we actually create a
Mhm.
collaborative system, all of this stuff could go so much better. It can't just be on journalists, and it can't just be on police officers or victim service providers or nonprofits. Like, it really is something that I think everybody needs to come to the table and say, all right, we're all committed to doing this better. Here's the role you can play. Here's the role you can play.
Yeah,
Here's the role you can play. And we all agree,
because
know?
things will fall through the cracks.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Things would fall through the cracks. And it's something that needs to be maintained on an
Mhm.
ongoing basis, because, in our business, people change positions, people leave journalism, people join journalism, all of that stuff. I wonder, Steph, because you've mentioned therapy a few times, and I always
Yeah.
love to mention the therapy I go through too, so people understand that I am absolutely an advocate for therapy. But there's been a lot of talk over the last, especially in recent years, about self-care for journalists,
Mhm.
and which is fantastic. I wonder how important you rate self-care in your job on the trauma beat, and how you practice that self-care.
Yeah, I'm really glad we got to this question because I want journalism students to read this or listen to this or watch this, um, because it is so important. Like it's so important. Um, and I love when I turn off for the day. I'm not a journalist anymore. I'm just I am an aunt and a dog mom, and I can play competitive hockey. Like after hours, I identify more as an athlete than anything else because that's just something I love doing. I love lifting and playing hockey, and I love cooking and health and my husband.
You're
We
only
also
mentioning that because he just got home from work, right?
yeah. Um, no, but that is something that is so important is being able to switch off. Like, oh my gosh, one of my biggest pet peeves, and if someone's getting into journalism and they don't know that this will happen to you, is when you introduce yourself and like, oh, hi, I'm Steph. Like this happens at hockey, at other things. Like, hi, I'm Steph. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a journalist. Oh, this is off the record. I'm so I'm so over that joke. I'm so over it
Yes.
because I am I am not just that, and this speaks to like for people who aren't in journalism, who have an image of journalists, like I turn off. I have this other identity, after hours. Sometimes I don't wear my glasses intentionally. I only wear my glasses when I work.
You're like Superman. You only
Yeah,
you only you
it is a
only put
little
it on when you're
Superman.
a journalist. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that.
So yeah, that is so important. And yeah, don't be afraid of therapy and companies and newsrooms should be supporting that. Absolutely. Everyone should do therapy, whether you're a journalist or not. Like
I
it's so
know.
beneficial
I know.
for sure.
Yeah, it
Um,
certainly helped me.
yeah,
Are there any lessons that we haven't discussed that you wish you would have learned before beginning your career?
I think it's knowing how it will change you.
Mm.
You will grow so much as a person. You will, it's almost frustrating in having conversations with people who aren't used to seeing both sides, especially like when it comes to the political realm. But um, oh my gosh, like I'm like people ask like, are you liberal or left or right leaning or stuff? I'm like, honestly, don't know. Like I'm really in the center. Like I
Yes,
see everything now. I
exactly.
can't help it.
Hmm.
I hate those conversations because I literally don't know what to say. And if it's like a hot topic about anything, I'm like, well, there's this.
Mhm.
Oh, but then there's this, and they're like, well, pick a side. I'm like, no, I can't do it. And then it'll change you. And I was just listening to your last episode of season 1, and I've forgotten his name, unfortunately,
Oh,
but
Brett.
yeah, he was, and he had said some things that kind of I connected with how I am a little more cognizant. If it's just me, I'm a little more cognizant of my surroundings, and I will check exits. And that's just like reporting on
Mm.
things that have happened, right? Like I haven't been involved in a school shooting or anything like that. Like unfortunately
Mm.
he has, and gosh, I feel for him. Because if I feel this way, like I can't imagine where they're at. But yeah, and even when, like, as much as I love like saying like, oh, I work out so I'm better at hockey and for my long-term health, there's also a fact, like, and I probably look a little more hard. I look like I'm harder to kidnap or attack,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
like maybe I won't confront this one. It doesn't
Yeah.
help 5'3", but in that mission. But yeah, it is, that is something that's impacted me. And
You see the darker side of the world, and you see
yeah,
it all the time. It's very normal for it to feel like something bad is going to happen to you, or that you're
or
just on the verge of something.
there's just
Yes.
that other flip of the coin. It could happen, like things could happen there. And like I have a big dog for a reason. Like
Oh,
I like
interesting.
walking at nighttime, so I have a bigger dog who
Yes.
could not defend me from a squirrel, but he looks
As
um
long as he looks intimidating.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so but I also don't see that as a bad thing.
Mhm.
Like I'm my own person. You grow and you learn, you grow and learn. That is life. That is my philosophy. Like growth
Yeah.
is, that is okay. Like why be stuck in one way when you can see all sides? As annoying as it could be. So yeah, that's something I think, like, as I've learned as a journalist, is growing in that way. Um, and then I think I had to add like any like message for like survivors and stuff is to, um, and this was from your podcast with Rachel Maurice, is trust your local media. They know your community the best.
Mm.
Um, we have had a number of incidents here in Kingston. We had a terrorism arrest. We had a plane crash recently, or not recently. Like this happened in 1 year. It was quite a year. I actually wrote
Mm.
a column about like, what is this crazy year?
Mm.
And in those big stories, outlets from Ottawa and Toronto would come in. They'd swoop in and do their story, and then swoop out again. I'm here. Like I'm here all the time. Like I'm gonna follow that story. So trust your local media, and it's not just the Whig. It's other, like we have a global station as well who knows their community well. Um, trust your local journalists and support them in that way. Like we are a struggling industry, so support us, please.
No kidding. Oh
We
my
and
gosh.
if it hasn't shown so far in this podcast, I love what I do, and I'm not alone in that in local journalism. We may
Mhm.
not be in Toronto or at a big paper, but we still do this for a reason. Like we love it.
Mhm.
We love our community. So
And you care
please,
about it. It's a part of your identity, right?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Buy your local paper, subscribe, do all of that stuff. So, Steph, considering like where you are in your learning journey and acknowledging that we're still on this learning journey, I'm still on this learning journey. It's, I think, probably going to be a lifelong one. What does the term trauma-informed journalism mean to you?
It means considering all sides of the story, in every aspect of that sentence. You're telling both sides of the story, but you're also considering how the story will impact everyone involved. So when it comes to trauma-informed journalism is acknowledging that there's someone there that is going to be impacted by that, whether it's the family directly, or someone you didn't even think it would. Um, yeah, and it's considering the greater good and appreciating those little impacts.
I love that. Steph, is there anything we haven't discussed that you'd like to get out there? Anything else in your notes we haven't gotten to?
Oh my gosh, I wrote way too many notes.
It's fine.
Yeah, I think just support your local journalists. Know that we're human beings, that we make mistakes, that we're learning, that we're partners in your community, and where journalism is a vital role in the community. We can't overstate that enough, whether it's from politics to telling our community stories. We don't want people to vanish when things happen to them. We want their story to be told, if the family wants their story to be told, of course. And I think that's a message for readers. I think that's a message for our public agencies who'd rather not talk about things. Things belong in the light, good and bad, because if it's bad, be ready to learn from it and be ready to evolve. And there's nothing wrong with, I appreciate you more apologizing and admitting you made a mistake. Just tell me how you're going to fix it. Come up with a plan. Yeah. And I'm a human.
You are. You're a human. You're a dog mom. You're an aunt. You're a wife. You are jacked. You are a hockey star. I love that. And I'm not messing with you in any dark alley, Steph. Like, I was thinking about it before, but no more. Okay. Steph Crosier, I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your vulnerability, and yeah, just for taking the time.
And thank you for your podcast and what you're doing in your book, and everyone should read it. So, there we go.